Let's go, baby. All right, here we go, Hey, what's up, guys? How's it going? Welcome to another episode of the Player versus Live podcast. As always, my name is Gabo, and I will be your host. Thank you for tuning in, guys. I am super excited to bring you my next guest. He is a very passionate game designer and professor at the NYU Game Center. He has a background in production and media for companies like now This and Mashable. And he's very invested in innovating the ways in which people interact with stories and the way stories are told. This inspired him to look to games and study game design, and he is now working at Half Mermaid, an up-and-coming game company currently developing the game Project Ambrosio, a full-motion video game of the horror genre. It was a real pleasure to actually talk to a game designer, understand how he got there, and ask him questions about what's it like to work on a horror game with an amazing team. Please give a warm welcome to Jeff Petriello. So how you been, man? How's your week been? You said you were busy. What are the things that keep you busy?
This week has been up and down. Obviously, there's a lot going on in the world with our president being impeached for the second time.
Yeah.
Lots of really interesting conversations and important conversations I've had with friends. Honestly, it's been a little distracting from game design, I must say, but we've also been really busy at work as well. I got some new writing in for the game we're developing right now. So reviewing that, putting together our own production podcast, which we have at Half Mermaid. So the 5th episode of that, I'm working on editing. Yeah, and then also doing some work on researching potential partners and studios for the next project after Project Ambrosio, which we're starting to think about as well.
So what's your background really here? Like, what did you study? And how did you end up becoming a producer, a media producer?
Yeah, so I studied philosophy and literature in undergrad. I went to Columbia University, the college there, and I had a really great experience, but I had no idea what I wanted to do. I kind of just wanted to learn to think better and communicate better, which I definitely did. But yeah, I got out of school thinking I kind of wanted to be a writer, a screenwriter. I actually never even got to screenwriting. I started outlining a screenplay, and when I started, I felt like I was really not informed on how movies were made, and I thought it would be really necessary to fleshing out that screenplay. So I worked on a set, and then I got distracted by really liking working in production. So actually never even finished that screenplay, which is fine. I don't regret it because I found
That's
career
cool.
path that I didn't really know existed.
So what was it about production that was like, oh, this is cool?
Well, one thing was it wasn't behind a desk. I definitely am a people person. I like to interact with other creative collaborators on projects. So there's a ton of that when you're working in production. And another thing is it requires a lot of problem solving. Things come up in production that you don't expect. I loved the energy behind that type of problem solving. And also I found a lot of fulfillment in clearing the way for other creatives to be able to do their job best, whether that was writers or directors of photography or
What do you mean clearing the
folks.
way?
Just resolving any issues or problems that get in the way,
I see.
whether those are financial, equipment, interpersonal, whatever it is, really working to create a clear path for creatives to work uninhibited.
So in a sense, that's what you see a producer doing. Like, what is the job of a producer in your mind?
I think it depends on the production. When we're talking about film or the type of video games that I'm working on now at Half Mermaid, I feel like it's the producer's role to enable the director to create the film that they see in their head. For example, when I was working in digital production, where a lot of times there were no creative directors in an immediate sense, more just like editorial oversight, it's a lot more about making sure you hit certain content quotas, that you're producing at a certain amount at a certain pace. It's a little bit more of like a production pipeline, ensuring that that is healthy and running strong. Yeah.
So what you like about it though is it's this problem solving aspect that it's creative for you. I'm interested. Okay, so we're now in this producer world, right? And you didn't really. What's funny is that you didn't really study to become a producer, but somehow you became a producer, right? Is correct?
I didn't even have the opportunity to study production in undergrad.
So when you get this job at now this, how do you know what you're doing? Like,
I had no idea what I was doing.
okay.
And I am really, really grateful to the founder of that company. His name's Ken Lear. He started it alongside his VC partner, Eric Hippo. They do a lot of digital investment, consumer facing investment, and they wanted to start the first purely socially distributed news network. And Ken had experience sort of innovating in that space. He was one of the founders of the Huffington Post. So in many ways, he took me under his wing to learn how to start a business and get a foothold in the media space. So
Mm-hmm.
that was really a combination of luck and networking that led me into that position.
Okay. So I'm assuming that it's through this production process that you're going through when you're working in now this, that somehow you're like, maybe I need to study programming. So how does
Yeah.
that come up in your process?
So I found that one of the things that I consistently found both fulfilling and creatively exciting, and just rewarding in the workplace, both at Now This and again when I moved to Mashable and did digital production there,
Mm-hmm.
was working with the product team. I loved it. Like when I was at Now This, it was about developing our first app and giving feedback on that and trying to get that to be a really cool experience for the user. And then when I was at Mashable, there were some internal apps we were developing that my team was responsible of creating like sample content for. So I was really engaged in the development cycle of and I just loved it. Like every time I got to sit in those CTO offices and talk with them, I was just really excited. It was really frustrating to me that I couldn't convince my superiors on the editorial team at Now This and in the marketing team in Mashable. They were justified in not allowing me to do this, but hiring engineers myself so that we could create things with them, because I didn't have any experience working with
Right.
engineers. The last time I coded was in high school. I never really did it professionally. So there was no track record of me being able to handle working with engineers outside of those interdepartmental collaborations that I had. So I found that really frustrating and I wanted to change that. So that's why I decided to attend the Full Stack Academy, which is a full stack web development boot camp in New York.
Mm-hmm.
While I was still at Mashable, I started going on nights
So
and weekends.
help me understand though, why, like, you wanted to hire engineers, programmers to for your media team. Why did you need this? Like, why did you think it was cool?
Yeah. Well, to me, I mean, code can be used to do anything,
Mm-hmm.
but it can certainly use to be creative. And so to me, there really wasn't that big of a difference between a creative coder and a motion graphics designer or an animator.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really frustrating me mentally that even though I didn't see that difference, it was a professional obstacle that I couldn't cross without more experience in bringing those people in.
But what
Um,
obstacles in particular? Like,
at the time, for instance, at Now This, I
mm-hmm.
was there from 2000, I want to say a late 2011, maybe. And during that time, there were a lot of social network apps popping up. While I was there, Instagram released Instagram video for the first time. Vine was blowing up. Snapchat Discover came out. Snapchat blew up, generally speaking. Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of this product innovation that was driving creativity and media consumption. And to me, it just felt like there was so much opportunity for us to create not necessarily full-blown social networking apps, but even just simple web apps that we could engage the community with. A huge inspiration for that type of thinking
Mm-hmm.
was actually the interactive team at the New York Times. They consistently produce gorgeous, innovative pieces of technology that enhance storytelling in the
Mm-hmm.
news media, and they do it just on a web page. Back when I was at Now This, the huge one that came out, there was this interactive story, I think it was called Snowfall, I want to
Mm-hmm.
say, and it was like the first time that anyone had really seen parallax scrolling enhance a news story on a web page. It was like revolutionary at the time. That's just one example, and I was like, whoa, this is
So cool.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So okay, so now you go and study programming to basically try to enhance the way that you can tell stories from a production media point of view, right? How do you end up in the New York NYU Game Center? What makes the connections between programming and games at that time?
So to me, the thing that made those engineered pieces of storytelling exciting was that you interacted with them in a new way. They asked something of you as a viewer that other pieces of media did not, more linear or passive pieces of media that you're just consuming by reading or
Mm-hmm.
watching. These you had to interact with in some way. You had to play or click or explore. To me, that was a fundamentally different type of communicating to an audience than linear storytelling was. I felt pretty confident at that point in my career that I could faithfully produce a piece of linear content. I could tell a story from beginning to end in a way that would, generally speaking, be well structured and engaging to an audience,
Mm-hmm.
at least an American audience. I did not know how to create a piece of interactive storytelling. I did not have the confidence or the language to do that. So
Mm-hmm.
I asked myself, what type of program could I go to that would teach me those things? So I applied at the time when I applied to grad school. I was deeply considering 3 programs. I wound up applying to 2 and having to choose between those as to which I would go to. The first I was interested in was the MIT Media Lab, like the Hogwarts of technology. They just like do like really weird, awesome, cool, interactive stuff. And then I also was super into the NYU ITP program, which is very similar to the MIT Media Lab in that it's kind of an open arts, interdisciplinary, technology focused
Mm-hmm.
program where you can kind of build whatever you want. At the Game Center, there's a large portion of courses that everyone is required to take. It's a much more on the rails education. And I knew that I responded to that type of education really well for my undergraduate experience. So I really liked that. And I also understood from my very classical undergraduate liberal arts education that I responded really well to learning the super fundamentals of things. Like I studied ancient philosophy and
Got you.
logic,
Got you.
basically.
Mm-hmm.
And games to me seemed at the time, and I still believe this, to really be the oldest form of human interactive design. I mean, games have been played arguably since before we were even human.
Right.
There
Right.
are other species that play games. So we have conceivably been playing games literally from the moment Homo sapiens have existed. So to me, to study that really felt like a way to access interactive design on a really fundamental level. And that was my chief motivation for going there.
Yeah, that's very deep. I mean, I recently got into D&D, and I also know that you're fascinated with role playing games as well. I was looking at some of your portfolio, and we can talk about that. But finish the story. I was super excited to buy my first dice, right? My first D20s, my first set of dice, and to my wife's credit, she got me like these beautiful fucking dice, dude. Like, and I'm like, I kept looking at them and thinking like, dude, these are like some really cool items. And then I take the D6, which is like a classic 6-sided die, And then I'm like looking at it and it's like, dude, this fucking thing goes way back, right? It goes like
Yeah, till
fucking
they were since they
3000
were made from
BC.
bones,
Yeah,
even
exactly.
earlier.
So it's kind of crazy how like games are like, this artifact that we've been interacting with, and it's very true what you're saying. It's one of the oldest interface between the brain and an artifact. I feel like. What is your relationship with games growing up? Were they at some point influential?
Yeah, so I have always played games, and in my childhood, they really held a spot of like, what's the word? They felt like a treat. It almost felt like dessert, right? I For a long time, I think up until I was about 9, I wasn't allowed to play video games in my house. Like we weren't allowed to have a console or
I see.
a portable game device. I always had to go to my friends to play video games. So
Mm.
even in that sense, it was sort of a forbidden fruit, a forbidden pleasure. So I always had that nice, like, this is a treat moment.
Mm.
And then, but my mother was really into board games. She was a huge Scrabble fan. Used to play a lot of Monopoly. I used to remember hearing my parents scream over Trivial Pursuit, even though I would never have been able to play that at the time. And so those family game nights or those opportunities to play always felt really special and exciting and cool and fun. And I always loved playing board games ever since I was a little kid. So yeah, it's always kind of just been a really nice pleasure, I think.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that games are made for, like, it's to have fun, right? I think that people use them for like all kinds of different things, but opinion, that's why we play them, right? To have fun with them. Um,
Yeah. I also think, in retrospect, looking back on my childhood, now that I'm like a grown man and confident in my identity, I identify as a queer man. I look back on playing games with my friends, and video games and Dungeons and Dragons
yeah.
uh, were in many ways the pleasure I had most in common with the other boys, male identifying people in my age group.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't into sports. I
Mm.
was always felt really different, but games I loved. And these boys also loved games. And so I could connect with them on that level and really make real friendships and real connections around that.
Mm.
And so, in many ways, games were sort of a life raft for me to be able to survive in a very heteronormative culture that I grew up in. With In a genuine way.
Right. Yeah.
So they were also really important for me in that regard.
Tell me a little bit about the games that you've made. I like I said, I went into a little bit of your portfolio, and you have some sort of passion for these board games, these tabletop games, and some of the role playing games that you've made during I think maybe your curriculum in NYU, the Game Center.
Yeah.
Why are these interesting to you, and what is to you the fundamental difference between a video game and these analog role playing games?
Those are great questions. So I have a very hot take. It's certainly hyperbolic, but in
I
many
love it.
ways, I feel like the role playing game, the tabletop role playing game, is maybe the most important contribution that America has made to the arts in terms of medium and development
Okay.
in a new medium. It's insanely influential. D&D alone is
Yeah.
responsible for the concept of leveling, of progress. You can make an argument that it's responsible for the idea that you are playing an individual character. Think of all of the things that have come from that. It's incredibly exciting
Yeah,
and
it's super
special.
vast.
And I also took a class with Naomi Clark, who is a faculty member at the Game Center.
She's super interesting in the shows that she does, like I think
So good.
super
The
interesting.
discourse.
Yeah,
She
yeah,
does the
the
discourse.
discourse,
Yeah.
yes. Uh huh.
So anyway, I took a class with her called indie RPGs or role playing on the margins. And it's all about the history of independent RPGs explicitly outside of Dungeons and Dragons. And I learned so much in that class. And it really kind of taught me, or, again, this is kind of a hot take. In many
I love
ways, you
hot
can
takes.
find video game innovations, any kind of systemic innovation, it probably is somewhere in an independent tabletop role-playing game first. I feel like tabletop role-playing game designers are literally the avant-garde of game design. They do things first, they do them the weirdest, they do them like with so much creativity and openness and vulnerability, and I just love it. To me, tabletop role-playing games specifically are really foundational in understanding how games are constructed and how people play games. So that's really where my interest lies in them. It is quite academic, but I find them incredibly creatively liberating.
That's interesting.
And in terms of the main difference between analog games and video games, I mean, really the biggest difference is just that the computer is really hiding a lot of the systemic functioning of the game behind a screen, behind code. Whereas in a tabletop game, all of those systems are explicit and visible most of the time. So
yeah, it's up to, like, you have to implement the system that's in a tabletop role-playing game. Like, the system is being implemented in a video game. I feel like, in a sense, it's much, well, from talking to like other professors that teach about games, like, it seems to me that teaching about like analog games makes you really understand the system behind it, like makes you really you have to implement the rules, you have to implement the system, as opposed to the system being implemented by a computer and you being part of the experience, right? It's like understanding the structure behind the game is, I think, something very important when it comes to game design. Well, let's move on a little bit to what you're doing right now, because dude, I was playing Telling Lies, bro, and super interesting game, super engaging. It put me in this mood of like, oh, I need to find out what's going on. I need to figure this shit out. In a movie, I feel like you have everything so packaged. Everything's like this is linear, like you said, right? Like, but the experience of being able to experience this story in a non-linear way while still being surprised at the things, some of the facts that happen are really cool. What is your thoughts on on these kinds of games?
Telling Lies, I thought, was such a cool and innovative game. I had never played a FMV game that involved an ensemble cast.
What
that
is
I
an
thought was
FMV game?
Full motion video game.
Okay.
So that's like a video game that uses clips of videos that have actors in them. They're not necessarily animated. So yeah, Telling Lies, I mean, I was just so impressed by the performances. It gave me so much of what I love of film and television that I've never really gotten from games, but still I had a really fun and exciting time navigating it like I do other types of games. So it was really exciting to play that. It was really cool.
And the reason why we're talking about this, so our audience knows, is because Half Mermaid is owned by Sam Barlow, who is the creator of Telling Lies. And you guys are working on your next project called Project Ambrosio. Okay, what?
Project Ambrosio.
Yeah. Ambrosio. Project Ambrosio. What is this, man? It looks so eerie. It looks so mysterious. I'm scared of even after experiencing Telling Lies. I'm a scary dude. I'm a scaredy guy. Like, I don't like being scared. You can ask the waifu. Like, I don't like watching movies that are scary. I look at Project Ambrosio, like kind of like the teaser images, and it's like, oh my god, I don't even know if I want to.
Yeah, so before Sam started making games independently, he was the designer and writer of Silent
Silent
Hill
Hill.
Shattered Memories, which was a Wii game installment of the Silent Hill series, which is a very spooky series if you've never played it. Sam has a real love for and history with horror in video games. And her story and Telling Lies, his independent projects, are not horror projects. Telling Lies is sort of a political thriller slash mystery, interpersonal drama kind of thing.
Yeah.
So even though, so we're keeping from those games is a lot of the format in the sense that it is Project Ambrosio is another FMV game.
Mm-hmm.
So Sam, we are definitely working on a third big FMV experience with this game. So that is definitely linking it to those two games. But in terms of themes and what we're exploring, we're tapping in a lot of stuff that even goes back further into Sam's career. So we're bringing in that horror, we're bringing in that spookiness into that format, which is really exciting.
Man. So what's it like to like be part of a team like this that is working on a on a horror game? Like well, I have tons of questions regarding like, are you ever scared? Like when you see writing, do you ever like put the book in the fridge?
Yeah, so not only does that happen, but yeah, in our prototype, even the little silly like test footage that we're shooting on our webcams, like Sam has actually scared me, like literally, which is a good sign. So that's kind of fun. And I did a ton of research for this game in 2020, and there were some of those references that are definitely spooky. One book that I read to research this project is called House of Leaves. It was so spooky. It really got in my head and creeped me out. I highly recommend that book. And I think actually now it's one of my favorite movies I've ever seen. I think it's literally in my top 5 of all time now is Possession. That's probably the favorite movie reference that I've had through this research process.
What about, tell me about the research process. What do you mean by research? Like, are you just trying to find out like the history of horror games, and or like is it more of a psychological research where like you're like, oh, what kinds of behaviors do we want to try to instill in these players when they're playing? Like,
when I first came onto Half Mermaid last February, so February of 2020, and I was being essentially onboarded to the idea of Project Ambrosio, because even though that's really when we got started on it full time, Sam has obviously been putting it together for a little while before then. And he had just like a bunch of references that he was constantly referring to in terms of tone or theme or structure or whatever. And so I had to catch up on those references and make sure that I understood what he was talking about and can speak to those
gotcha.
characters or settings or styles or whatever it was. So I just had to catch up with him and read and watch a bunch of things that had inspired this game in his mind.
What's striking to me about this company in particular is that you guys are focused on storytelling, right? And you're exploring this medium. I mean, Netflix tried to do this though, and I feel like it wasn't that good with a Bandersnatch. Do you remember the Black Mirror Bandersnatch?
Yeah, so Bandersnatch, I think, first of all, it was a success in the sense that it was a mainstream hit
Yeah.
for an interactive work of fiction that extended beyond the world of games. So,
Mm-hmm.
because it really exposed a lot of new people
Yeah,
to
but
interacting with
you play
stories in a
Telling
new way.
Lies. You play Telling Lies, and it's like it's the next level. You know, it's like
Yeah,
fuck.
if you ask someone unfamiliar with interactive, I would almost guarantee you that 9 times out of 10,
That's where they're
that
gonna.
person would posit essentially a branching storyline where you are presented with a binary choice every few minutes and you make a choice and the story goes that way and you make another choice and you're basically falling down a tree
Yeah, yeah.
of decision making.
But
It is sort of the lowest hanging fruit for interactive storytelling design. And I think one of the cool parts about what Sam is doing is he's thinking about these types of interactive filmic experiences from a navigation standpoint, the navigation itself needs to be innovative. It can't just be a classic structure that we've been used to reading or watching for 3 decades now.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Like the emotions that it caused, that it evoked on me. It's completely different than Bandersnatch. Bandersnatch, I'm a passive viewer, right? And in Telling Lies, I'm like an active investigator. It's very different. One is I wasn't very familiar with FMVs, and two, I am more of a conventional gamer. So like whenever experimental games like that come out, somebody needs to tell me like, dude, you need to play this shit, because
critics and the press like kind of love the
they
games.
loved it. Like they loved it,
and it's really like getting people to play them. It's kind of hard. Well, it's certainly unique, right?
Yeah.
Like you said, it's not a traditional video game. You're not like controlling a character in a 3D
you don't have a
world,
controller,
traversing a space
yeah,
or jumping on platforms, right? So yeah, it's definitely unfamiliar in that regard. But I think it also, part of our goal as a studio and for that game is to reach people outside of that traditional gamer audience. So yeah, we would love, obviously, I think these games are exciting to play, even if you're a huge fan of traditional video games.
Yeah, like a
I
Call
think
of
you
Duty.
still really like them.
Yeah.
But I think if you're explicitly not a fan of traditional video games, you might still like it. So that's kind of, it's more of an expansive philosophy.
Yeah.
Right. Than
it's making the scope of video games broader. Yeah.
Hopefully.
I mean, guaranteed. I would think so. I think that's part of the force that's like pushing video games is doing that, right? It's like expanding the ways that we can explore video games. When it comes to making games, your team kind of dictates what kind of game you can make. Half Mermaid, you guys are like four members?
4 people, yeah.
You guys are a tiny development team, right? Like you guys are not gonna make games like God of War or stuff like that. Like those kinds of companies have enormous teams to make these games. So how does your team work? What are the intrinsic skills that you guys are looking for when you're building a game like that?
Well, first, I do want to say, I mean, part of the reason we're 4 people is because we're new, right? So Half Mermaid in its current iteration, outside of just being a production company that puts together kind of an ad hoc team, which is how it was functioning for Telling Lies, the studio as an institution that remains between games only started in February of 2020. So we're new, right? So that's definitely part of the reason we're small. And I wouldn't underestimate us. It would be awesome to make a game with the quality and depth of God of War in a 3D space. And I wouldn't put it past us to be able to do that. It would just require a lot of restructuring and expansion.
Right.
So, I don't want to put anything out of our realm of possibility because even though we're making this FMV game now, we're certainly interested in a wider variety of storytelling tools than that. But in terms of the structure now, I mean, because we're really focused up until kind of very recently, almost exclusively on Project Ambrosio, the scope of it is relatively small for 2020 in the sense that we needed to basically flesh out the design, write it, start thinking about partners that we need to bring in when we're ready for that. And so all of that kind of work is not, you don't need a huge team to do that. It was really just kind of supporting Sam's vision, providing him with research, taking care of some like business details so he doesn't have to worry about that kind of stuff, sharing the story of this development. So, in terms of the moment in the development pipeline where we're going to need a lot more help and a lot of different types of creatives, we are really going to approach that this year.
I see.
Yeah.
I see. So it's kind of like, right. So it's kind of a process. I didn't mean to say that you guys are incapable of like, of tackling a project like that, like creatively. What I meant to say is that it will require more infrastructure, right, from you guys,
absolutely,
from like from any game developer. the game Stardew Valley and how it got made by like one dude, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like those are the kinds of games that one dude can make, is what I'm trying to say. Like it has to be
I
like a
mean, good
pix.
luck making Stardew Valley. That's incredible.
Yeah, even
I don't know. I think that's a really high bar for what you're expected to make as an individual.
what gets you most excited to work on when you're working on these games?
I think for me, one of the most exciting parts of it is witnessing Sam's process. This is the first game that I've made with him. Every creative that I've worked with is different and has their own way of doing things. So it's always an exciting aspect of a project to witness that, especially if that person is someone that I respect and I think is doing, cool work, which
Right.
is definitely the case with Sam. So I think that that's my favorite part of it, just like bearing witness to how he builds his games, providing assistance wherever I can, and feedback however is most useful. I'm an eternal student. That's my mindset. I love to learn new things.
Sam seems like a very interesting individual after reading some of his blogs as well. Really interesting guy, and I bet just working with somebody that knows their shit, it can be inspiring.
I also have to thank him. I think maybe one of my ancillary favorite parts of this is he is like an encyclopedia when it comes to movie and game references. He's just like literally knows so much, and it's just so cool for him to listen to him when we're talking about something like throw out this movie or this game. And so I've really been exposed in the last year to so many new stories and ways of storytelling. I'm so grateful for that.
One of the things that I like what you said, you were an eternal student, so the eternal student has become a adjunct professor. Tell me a little bit about like your relationship with the Game Center. What does an adjunct professor do?
Yeah, so I am an adjunct faculty member at the Game Center. I teach a class called Introduction to Game Design, which is a mandatory class for all incoming freshmen that are pursuing a bachelor's of fine arts degree in game design. So it's basically Game Design 101. It's a class that focuses on analog design, so there's no video game design in the class. It's all card and board game, and it's almost exclusively group work. So you're working with your fellow classmates in a small class size, definitely under 20 people, generally under 15, to create, I think it's like 7 prototypes over the course of the semester, and learn the fundamentals of game design, practice, methodology, our philosophy of iterative playtesting that we teach at the Game Center. A lot of times it's people's first time doing a lot of that stuff. So it's a really cool fundamentals course, and I'm really grateful that I get the chance to teach it. So I taught for the first time in the fall of 2018 and of 2019.
You really gonna crack the whip on those kids?
Well, it's art school, so it's definitely a little different than, for instance, like the undergraduate experience I had. We really treat games as forms of expression. The Game Center is a part of the Tisch School of the Arts at NYU, and it is a fine arts degree. It is not a technical degree. You cannot go to the Game Center and get a degree in game programming or technical art, for instance. You go there to get a game design degree, and you can focus on those things if that's your skill set, but you're walking out with a game design degree. So it's, in terms of evaluating students, a lot of it in terms of the game itself is subjective, and I don't crack the whip on how they want to express themselves. What I will crack the whip on is making sure you hand stuff in time, that it has all the requirements, that you've listened to feedback and you've put work into it. That's really what matters. And honestly, when you're a freshman and you've just moved to New York City, that's enough.
Oh man, we're setting the bar so low. These kids. Well, I'm interested in the video game design degree, because man, I think that video game design is kind of like the job of the future, man. It's like it's parallel to like artificial intelligence researcher, like to me at least, in my opinion.
Well, AI is a huge part of game design
Oh,
in the 21st century. Frank Lance, the director of the NYU Game Center, that's his particular interest right now. So I know he's really looking into a lot of how that's affecting development.
and it's, to me, it's because it has a huge broad application, right? Right now we're seeing barely how it's permeating cultural norms and society. For example, the creation of Snow World, which is like this VR that allows people to experience less pain where they're going through skin burn surgery. Therapists are using online environments to kind of teach people how to interact socially before they do it in the real world. The spectrum is getting wider and wider. And my question is, how do you encompass this entire thing in a curriculum for game design?
I think we tried to open up pathways for students to walk down depending on what their interests are. So it's up to you as an artist and as a student to decide where your interests lie and what your design philosophy and goals are. And our goal as educators, I think, is to give you the tools to make that happen and also provide you with the opportunity and the resources to do so. So
So
I
you
don't
don't
think
have courses like psychology in games or something like
we
that?
do.
You do? Okay.
Yeah.
So you, in somewhat, you do prepare them with like an
But
interdisciplinary, like,
yeah, but those are
curriculum.
elective classes. So if you don't want to take them, you don't have to.
I see.
Yeah,
So
it's really up to you.
so what would you consider is the core curriculum then?
So our core curriculum definitely includes game design. So you have to take the course that I teach, for instance, Introduction to Game Design. You also have to become familiar, at least somewhat, with game studies, the academic study of games and the analysis of games. You have to make a game. That's definitely a part of the requirements. So
So
you
there's like a
need to
game
take a
studio.
development and studio class, and you need to learn to work together. So you're going to, at some point, be learning collaborative game development
Mm-hmm.
skills. What else?
It's just like, to me, it's a little bit hard to pinpoint like what is game design, right? Like, I mean, I can't even pinpoint what the fuck is architectural design. You know? Like, and I studied that.
Well, I think once you get deep enough into any academic study, it kind of feels like even the most basic questions are unanswerable.
Yeah.
We can argue about, like, for instance, what a game is till the world
Yeah.
ends, and we probably will
We'll never
have
end
an
this
answer.
podcast.
So yeah, I think game design is no different than philosophy or architecture in that regard.
Okay, well, maybe we can answer the question like this. And what are you hoping to accomplish as a game designer?
Yeah, I think what my goal in being a game designer is to create artifacts of culture that stick with people and impact them and hopefully empower them. I think it's really also important to me that those people skew younger. I think if you're really impacted positively by a work of art in your youth, it can really send you on a number of awesome paths. And I know that there's creators out there that did that for me, and I would love to be able to return that to someone else.
All right, Jeff. Hey, man, thank you so much for doing this, dude. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. You're one of the first game designers that I've had on the show, and it was very enlightening talking to you, man. Thank you.
Sweet. Yeah, thank you. And if anyone's interested in learning more about what I'm working on or the Game Center, you can follow me pretty much anywhere on social at the Beth. That's like Jeff with a B instead of a J.
Mm-hmm.
You can also follow Half Mermaid on Twitter. You can go to halfmermaid.co to sign up for our mailing list, which is full of all sorts of cool insight from Sam, myself, Natalie, and Connor. And you can listen to our production blog, which we post to the Half Mermaid SoundCloud and also to all of the above platforms I've mentioned. Yeah, and I would love to stay in touch with anyone who's listening who's interested in any of it.
Well, Jeff, it's been a real treat. Thank you so much for being here.
All right,
have a good one.
Have a great rest of your week. Thanks for having me.